We spoke in February about the importance of the oral language skills, and I believe that I mentioned at the time that when I speak to a room full of English teachers, I always give them math to talk about, because that's the only way that they understand. And I'm not, well, I don't mean to stereotype, but it's there. That's the only way that they understand what it feels like to be a person who struggles with language. Because you give an English teacher math to talk about, and all of a sudden they don't know how to articulate their thoughts about math. They might be able to do the computation, but how do I explain what it is that I'm trying to do? If I asked you to explain something to me, how to drive. The majority of us, if not all of us, know how to drive. But if I asked you to explain to me how to drive, you could do it. You'd talk around it. If I asked you to write an explanation of how to drive, that would be a little bit more daunting, wouldn't it? And yet, we're all fluent. We're articulate, we're college educated. So what is it that makes the writing component more difficult than the speaking component?
Takes longer.
Takes longer, why? I'm using fewer words when I write. Why would it take longer?
I think because, like, if you've been driving for a long time, you stop thinking about what it takes to do it.
Okay.
It just happens naturally.
Okay. But I still have to think about it if I'm going to speak about it.
Right, but that's the thing. It's like you don't even, and you jump over a lot of the steps that you do because you've been doing it for a while.
And when I'm writing, I can't jump over those steps. I have to be more explicit.
And then you come to the point where, like, if I was being the one writing, I'd be like, okay, so how detailed do I have to be?
Okay.
Details. I think of the details.
Spelling. Darn it, spelling. Details.
Sequence.
Plan it better.
Yeah, your audience has never seen someone drive before. You know, if they've never seen somebody drive a car before, you can't.
Right. I don't know who my audience is. When I'm speaking, typically my audience is right in front of me. I can see the light bulbs go on, or I have no idea what she's talking about, so that I can vary my words, possibly. Get feedback. We talked about spelling, we talked about structure, we talked about sequence, we talked about the main difference. The main difference is when we're speaking, we're nebulous. We can talk around an idea and use extra words or use more, we can vary, we can do a little dance around what we're explaining. But when we are writing, we have to make it concrete. We are concretizing our thoughts. We are applying all of the rules, the spelling and structure and sequence, we're applying all of the rules to this nebulous thought. It really doesn't matter what I'm asking you to articulate, as long as you see that for us, this is easier because, again, you can talk around it. This is more demanding, and I would argue more intimidating. Right, Tony? Is it intimidating texting an English teacher?
Yeah.
Yesterday he's like, dang it, I hate texting you. Because we have to be more concrete with our thought. Yes?
It's kind of like when you have a choice between making a speech or writing a paper.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, heck yeah.
You get up there and write, they can't see those punctuation and everything when you're making that speech. If you make a mistake, you just put it another way. But that paper's critiqued in detail.
Yes. I love that example because it perfectly articulates my next point. However, if this is my second language, I want to write it. I'm not going to get up in front of you and speak it because I don't know this language like you do. I want to have the opportunity to make it concrete and to follow the rules and to get the structure. I want to do this, and then if you make me speak it, I can do that. So I'm so glad you used that example. It's perfect. We, in our primary language, want to do this and then this. But very often, when it's your second language, it is less intimidating to have the opportunity to apply the rules first and to get the structure down first before you move this way. It is incredibly important that we allow both opportunities in all of our classes to go back and forth, even in math. We need to make sure that they are talking about talking about math and using the words, and that they're writing about math and using the words and going back and forth. Because it's not until we make our nebulous thoughts concrete that we really own them. Unless it's just me, which I don't think it is, you've probably had an opportunity in your life to say something and then go, oh, wait, that doesn't make sense. Or to say something and say, well, now that I say that out loud, that's not really what I meant. Have you ever done that? I do that in fights all the time. When I get in an argument with somebody, I'll say something, and it's like, oh, that sounded right in my head, but as soon as I said it, I probably shouldn't have. So we know that as soon as we commit it, it becomes more concrete. Think about your notes that you've taken. You don't have a lot of notes on your paper, but you have concretized all of those thoughts that have been running around in your head, and you own them for the most part. You chose words or phrases. You maybe even changed the wording and phrasing to make it fit the application to you or to your classroom, right? So you've made it concrete, and now you have more ownership over it. So we need to make sure that we allow both opportunities. The story about Jacob. How do I know he owns the word? Because he used it. Right? He used it correctly. He used the correct definition, and he used it syntactically correctly. It is not until you use a word, it's not until it is in your usable, oh my goodness, what is the? Yes, it is in your schema. It is in your vernacular. There's another term. Yes, it's in your vernacular. It's in your schema. Anyway. And it has to be part of your, here we go, usable language. It's your usable language. It is your part of your schema. It is your vernacular. It's your usable language. I've used this example before. You've heard a word, you've learned a new word, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere, right? It's not that it wasn't there before, it's that now it's your usable language. And so you recognize it. Before you just skipped over it because it wasn't part of your usable. Now you're recognizing it. So we have to make sure that the language that we are teaching our students becomes part of their usable language, and that's not going to happen unless we give them the opportunity to use it. And we have to have them using it in the nebulous form and in the concrete form and back and forth. Yes? But we need to keep in mind that some of our students need to do one, some of our students need to do the other, so we need to allow both opportunities. So they write something and then they talk to their neighbor, or they talk to their neighbor and then they write, and they need to have the option of going back and forth and the ability to go back and forth. I want to talk to you about your, am I correct in the understanding that you have interactive notebooks that some of you are using? Some of you are using notes. We talked in February about note-taking, and we talked a little bit about it today. If there are images on the screen or on an overhead that they are copying down, very often, if they have no context for it, if they don't know what it is that they're writing down, they're just transferring symbols from one place to another. It's far more effective if you teach the concept first so that they have the context and then have them copy down any notes that they need. Do you see the difference? So now these symbols aren't meaningless. Now they understand them, and then they're copying them. But when they're copying them, all you know for certain is that they are copying symbols. That's all you know for certain. Because they don't own those notes at all. The notes that you have written down, I know that you've owned them because you've had to process before you write. So keep in mind that if you are using interactive notebooks, or if you're using notes at all, think of to what end. Why is it important for them to copy it down if they don't know what it means? Is that potentially a waste of time? Or if I have a notebook where on one side it's the teacher's notes and on the other side the students are supposed to respond to it, am I using that effectively? If I, as the teacher, say, circle this, underline this, and if I'm telling them how to interact, are they just doing the 10 years ago wood shop where they're just following my rules? Is that an effective use of those notes? Or should they maybe refresh their memory with their notes? So I have my notebook, teacher notes, right? So I'm going to look over these. I'm going to refresh my memory. Now I'm going to put my notebook like this so that I have a blank page here. I turn to talk to my neighbor to tell my neighbor about the notes. We have a discussion, so we're rereading the notes, right, through conversation. Now maybe they look back and see if there's anything that they missed. Now they're going to turn to their neighbor. Did we miss anything? Go back and forth. Now they're going to write a summary of what they learned without looking, okay? By doing that, you can walk around and see whether or not they really get it. This becomes an accurate assessment of their notes, and it's not just copying symbols onto a page. They're putting it into their usable language, and they're demonstrating that. You can see if they really understand the word. Do they really understand how that should be used? And you can do that just by eavesdropping on their conversations as well. But as soon as they write it, then it's concretized. One of my favorite tools, actually it looks just like this. It's a blank square with lines next to it. It's one of my favorite tools to use in class, where my students have to draw a picture of what they just learned and then write about it, because our students don't have mental pictures playing in their head when they read or when they learn something. We have to train them to do that. And if at the end of a section of reading, at the end of a lecture, if you force them to draw a picture of it, you're training their brains to visualize. It's a great strategy. The only thing you don't want to do in note-taking is you don't want to waste time by having them copy something that is not doing any good. You don't want to take the time to do that. Oh my gosh, I can't. I would spend an hour having my students just copy down vocabulary words with the definitions off of an overhead at the beginning of a unit. I wasted an entire class period with that. Complete waste, because they didn't know the words before. So why would we do that? Why spend the time that way? Right? Okay. We also have to make sure that we allow and encourage and reinforce our students' revision of thought, especially in math. If you start out on one track and you decide that you need to go in a different track, that needs to be celebrated and encouraged. And that can be done in our notes as well. So you write something. Now you talk to your neighbor. Now add to what you wrote. Add to what you learned. Add to your notes. We need to make sure that we encourage this. One way that we can encourage it is by encouraging messy papers. It is entirely detrimental to the revision process for you to expect pristine papers handed into you, for you to expect their notebooks to look pretty. If you expect their notebooks to look, thinking is not pretty, thinking is not structured and organized, it's messy. They need to be able to, one of the best ways to encourage revision is to make them so that they cannot erase and they cannot use whiteout. They cannot start a new page. They have to put a line through it. If they put a line through it, you're encouraging the messiness of the thought and you're encouraging the revision. So writing it in the column, adding an arrow, turning to the back of the page, doing whatever it is that they need to do to revise their thinking. Because they think that when we tell them to revise it, it just means to write it in better penmanship, right? Write it prettily. And that's, again, that's not natural. That's not the way we think. I also want to make sure that we are perfectly clear that editing and revising are two totally different things. Editing is fixing mistakes. Revising is honing the thought, making it more clear and more precise. But it wasn't wrong to begin with. It just could be better and more clear and more exact. So we want to make sure that just because they got to the period at the end doesn't mean they're finished. So I love the multiple drafts. Even on math explanations, why not? Everybody does it. Be like everybody else. That's the lesson that we want to teach these children. No, I'm just kidding. Has anything from today changed any perspective in your classroom? Did anyone say, I would do X, Y, or Z differently? Could I hear from a couple of you? Yeah?
Oh, you mean to say it out loud?
Sure.
Oh, come on. Well, you know, the word problem business really kind of hit me. Because, you know, the kids have a tendency to read it and they go, I don't care. First time they read it. And I go, well, I don't get it either. You know, I don't read it. And I think that if we really personalize it and say, you know what, I have to read it 3 or 4 times before I can do it. And you're a 6th grader, and like you said, I'm a college-educated person. And if it's taking me this long, what makes me think that you're not going to need to read it 6 or 7 times to get it? So I think if you let them know that we're vulnerable too, and that we're not perfect too, they figure that out in 6th grade very quickly. You know? But anyway, I think they would do better. They would maybe give it a shot and read it a little more often, maybe.
Right, and you're not supposed to be able to get it the first time. You can't get it. They do. And I think a lot of that is that we very often don't give them the time and we don't show it. This is a great time to have that insight because you can start from day one.
That's an
Of
instructional
this
shift,
school year.
I think, that we're talking about.
Very
Because
much
as
so.
instructors, we need to change how we teach, right? That's where I see a big change. It's going to end that way.
Anyone else say this is something that yes?
You asked us to look at our assessment that we did throughout where Joel came to our classroom and observed. And we were looking at our assessment and it's not as girthy as it needs to be how you instructed us today. Maybe we need some problem solving or problems, as well as it just says explain.
Right.
I think needs to be, you need to explain to them how they need to explain it.
Right.
Instead of just explaining.
Right.
Why or why not?
And one of it's a Common Core buzz phrase, but it's not Common Core. It's the reason it's a buzz phrase in Common Core is because it's what we have to do in life. Explain using details from the text. Explain using evidence from this page. Explain, because that's what's missing in so many arguments that we hear, you know, Raiders suck. Oh yeah? Well, why? What's your evidence, you know?
Sorry, Mr. Morris.
I didn't say that that's what I think. I just said that that's what people say sometimes. But where's your justification, right? You have to justify your reasoning.
And that's in the standards that you gave us. Find evidence in the text too, and that was, I know I signed an affidavit and I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but in the performance task, or what task was it? Where it said, what were you talking about?
Assessments explaining using evidence from the text.
Cite evidence from the text, and that was something that, it's in the rubric, it's on the smart
Right.
balance rubric, and we
Right.
couldn't get the kids into
Yeah.
proficient because they would recall,
Right.
they would explain, but they never cited
Right.
the evidence within the text.
And I do want to clarify in a room full of not entirely ELA, but I know that many of you teach language also. Citing, as they're referring to it, doesn't necessarily mean like MLA author page number. It just means refer to which text you are drawing it from. Yeah, where did you get your information? That's all they mean by citing. And very often teachers misapply that and make it far more daunting. You just have to tell me when we're looking at paste, that painting altogether, okay, well, so if the one kid is eating paste, how do you know that? Where's your evidence? Point it out to me, right? That's all you have to do in the citing part.
That's what kept our students not proficient.
Right. And that's where, if we're all in it together, if they do it in every content area throughout the day, it'll be natural.
One of the things that I discovered as an ELD teacher when I just taught ELD is that the text says cite, and they don't know what that means. They don't understand that particular word. And we think they understand all of the words that they're reading. And they don't. They're decoding, like you said, but they're not understanding. They don't have the language that's run in their brain.
This one was my favorite. I was teaching senior composition, college preparatory class at Liberty High School. So you would assume relatively strong students. You may assume correctly, you may not. I asked my students to illustrate the difference between, and they were working independently, so it was totally quiet. One of my kids got to the question and said, I can't draw. And I was like, oh, I was horrified. I was so embarrassed for her that she'd said that. I was, oh my gosh, that's not what it means. The next period, I can't draw. Oh my gosh, in every class period, I had so many students who misinterpreted what I meant by that or misapplied the definition of that word that they even spoke it out loud. I thought, oh my goodness. So very often it's just understanding those little hiccups that they have. Silly. Did anyone write a Common Core takeaway on their construction paper? Like, I need to take this information back to my site. I need to take this information back to my PLC because they're kind of not getting this right. Anyone? Yeah, from the Common Core component. Anything?
Well, I don't know. I said that we wrote to allow them to make the mistakes and then let them learn from making those mistakes. We're so used to, like I said, running in, and we're like helicopter parents with our students. We buzz, and then there's a problem, we sweep out, take care of the problem, and come back up here. We need to quit coming back up here. We need to be down here. Not necessarily giving them the answer, but maybe give them clues along the way so that they can find the answer. So that, in the beginning, give them clues so that later they don't need those clues because they were taught how to do that.
This was, and I love, you're saying not giving them the answers, but giving them more clues. It changed my intervention structures when I realized, and I think I mentioned this in February, that we should be scaffolding the skill, not the assignment.
Right.
So they're struggling with that problem. What I very much want to do is show them how to set it up. or I want to provide this piece of information. But all I'm doing when I do that is helping them get that answer correct. Who cares about that? I need to help them learn the skill. So maybe I give them the same problem simplified, or maybe I give them a different text to attack, or maybe I give them so I support their learning of the skill and not just getting that answer correct. We struggle with being the helicopter parents. We struggle with going in and just giving answers and jumping to conclusions and being impatient. Even more so, and I don't know what your situation is out here, but even more so are IAs, our instructional assistants. I don't know if you have any paraprofessionals in your classroom. If you do, and I think a lot of the time they don't have the instructional background to really know how to go around that. But and parents, if you give something as a homework assignment, parents don't know how to let the students struggle. If the parents can help them with the homework at all, they don't know how to let them struggle. They will just do it for them. And so we really need to look at any homework assignments we give. Yes?
I don't want to interrupt. But
No, please.
I just want to know suggestions for what you just said about the instructional assistants. Do you have any things that, other than just telling them, oh, this is what I want, this is what we're going to try now, we need to let them struggle. How can we,
actually, that would be my best piece of advice, would be to be explicit with them and say, you cannot. And we talked about how veterans, we always know how it's going to fail because we've done it so many times before. So if you look at something and you know going in, they're going to struggle with X, Y, and Z. So I can have these 3 students go over here and work on multiplication tables, or go over here with my IA and have math facts in front of them while they're working through it. I can have them go over here with my IA and have my IA read the problem out loud to them because they're struggling with the decoding. You know, different things like that. I think it's just being mindful in advance of the parameters that you want to establish for what you do want them to do with the students. But yes, you need to be explicit. Kern High, not this past year, I don't think, but the year before, we started inviting instructional assistants and IAs and BIAs to all of our trainings. Because we said if they're not sitting there next to the instructor, they're not going to have a clue what any of this is supposed to look like. Funding is probably largely to blame, but yes, we need to make sure that their education keeps up with our instructional shift. Absolutely. Learning by doing. Yes? You can watch somebody else do it over and over and over again, but it's not until you do it yourself that you learn how. This is why my hairstylist can do my hair so much better than I can, because when she does it, I don't have the tools in my hand, right? She can tell me how she's doing it, but it's until I try to do it that I put it into action. One takeaway. Yes.
Okay, so you wanted something off of our sheet?
Yes.
Okay. So teach math practices and how to apply them to all learnings.
Yep. Make it explicit. Don't make it a mystery that these things should be transferable, that these skills should be transferable. Folks, do you have any questions for me before I hand the baton to Joelle? Thank you for a great day. This was very nice.